The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, sudden and final. Effective immediately. You're relieved of your duties. Please pack up your things. For a split second, I thought the room might be a bad dream. I was sitting in the boardroom, surrounded by the faces I had worked with for years. We were in the middle of a meeting. The old CEO, who had always been a mentor and a guide, was gone. The new one, a sharp-tongued corporate newcomer with a hunger for power, had made his decision, and he made it in front of everyone. It was a decision that didn't just change my life, it humiliated me right then and there. The buzz of murmurs that erupted from the board members was like a distant echo as the shock settled in. My heart was pounding in my ears, and my stomach twisted into a tight knot. I knew they were all watching, but in that moment, I only saw the new CEO standing at the head of the table, delivering his decree with cold efficiency. He looked as if he had just crossed off an item on his to-do list. As I reached for the file that contained the years of sweat, strategy, and effort I had put into this company, I realized something. This moment could define me. It didn't matter if it was unfair. It didn't matter that it felt like a betrayal. It was happening, and the only thing that I controlled now was how I responded. I stood up. There was no hesitation, no rage, no anger bubbling to the surface. I didn't let the weight of the moment break me. I closed the file in my hands with deliberate calmness, and as the entire room watched, I said simply, "Thank you." It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't bitter. It was the acknowledgement of something deeper, something no one in that room could understand at that moment. It was gratitude for the lessons, the growth, and the transformation that had come with my time at the company. It was a thank you for the chance to lead, to fall, and to rise again. The room went dead silent. The new CEO shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes darting between me and the others. It was as if he expected a fight, or at least a tantrum. But there was none. I felt a strange sense of peace. The power dynamics in the room were shifting, and it was no longer his game to play alone. I turned to leave, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. But before I could make it to the door, a voice broke through the silence. It was the legal director, a quiet, reserved man who had always stayed out of corporate drama. He slammed his hand down on the table with such force that the entire room flinched. "Get a lawyer," he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. The words rang out with unexpected force. There was no room for doubt in his voice. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. In that moment, something inside me clicked. The shock of being fired began to dissipate, replaced with a quiet surge of clarity. It wasn't just about walking out the door with my dignity intact anymore. It was about fighting for what I knew was right. I paused at the door, turning back toward the table, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. The room had just witnessed a transformation. The lesson wasn't just in my words, but in my actions. I walked out, but not with defeat. I walked out with purpose. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, sudden and final. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties. Please pack up your things. For a split second, I thought the room might be a bad dream. My eyes flitted across the faces of the board members, but all I could see was the new CEO standing at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes cold, and his tone dismissive. The meeting, which had just moments before seemed like any other, had just veered off course. This wasn't part of the agenda. He wasn't here to listen or discuss. He was here to eliminate. The sting of his words hit me harder than I could have ever imagined. The sharpness of the dismissal didn't leave room for questions, and in that moment, there was nothing I could do but accept that my time had come. I knew it was coming. The company had been shifting for months, and the new CEO had brought with him a culture of cutting ties, of ruthlessly pruning what didn't fit his vision. But I never thought it would happen like this. So publicly, so swiftly. The board, who had once praised my work and backed me through difficult decisions, now sat in silent judgment, observing my every reaction, as if waiting for me to crack, to shout, to beg for mercy. They didn't know me at all. As I sat there, the room seemed to close in on me. It felt as though the walls were leaning in, suffocating me with an unbearable pressure. The murmurs from the board members around me echoed in the distance, but the words they spoke were muted, as though they belonged to another world. My thoughts raced, heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the weight of their eyes, some sympathetic, some calculating, some indifferent. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet strangely calm. The shock of the moment began to dissipate, replaced by a sharp clarity. I realized in that instant that I had a choice. The choice to react in a way that would shape not only the rest of this day, but my entire future. This was my moment. I could feel it. There was no guarantee of fairness or justice in the room, but what I could control was how I handle this. I had the power to define my own dignity, to choose how I walked out of this room, no matter how brutal the exit. I had been trained to be calm under pressure, to think with logic when emotions ran high. But this wasn't just a business transaction. This was personal. I had poured years of my life into this company. My energy, my creativity, my sleepless nights had all been dedicated to building what we had. And now it was gone in a few short sentences. I could feel the anger rising, but it wasn't the time to unleash it. I needed something more. I needed something deeper than anger or frustration. I needed to show that I was unshaken, that I could walk away without losing who I was. I stood up slowly, each movement deliberate, controlled. I didn't let my hands shake as I closed the file in front of me, the one that held the last traces of my work here, the final records of my involvement in this company. The soft sound of the file closing seemed to cut through the room, louder than I expected. For a brief moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of the silence that followed, but I didn't. I didn't let it break me. With a final glance at the board members, I said, "Thank you." It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't dripping with bitterness. It wasn't an apology or a plea. It was simply gratitude. Gratitude for everything I had learned, for the people who had helped me grow, for the chance to lead. In that moment, I could have said so much more. I could have raged, could have begged for some semblance of fairness. But I knew that would only give them power over me. Instead, I took my power back. I closed the chapter with grace, with dignity, and with quiet strength. The room fell into an eerie, unnerving silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The tension thickened with every passing second. I could feel their eyes on me, expectant, confused, and perhaps a little disappointed. The CEO didn't know what to make of it. He was waiting for me to react, waiting for me to give him the drama he wanted so badly. But I didn't. I simply turned and walked toward the door. My heels clicked sharply on the polished floor, the sound echoing through the room as I made my exit. Just as my hand touched the door handle, I heard it. A loud, forceful sound that made me pause. It was the unmistakable slap of a hand slamming onto the table. The legal director, a quiet man who rarely involved himself in the power struggles of the company, stood up, his face hardening with an intensity that none of us had seen before. He fixed his gaze on me and said, with unwavering certainty, "Get a lawyer." The words seemed to break the silence in the room like a thunderclap. Everyone stopped breathing for a moment, unsure how to process what had just happened. The legal director wasn't one to speak out of turn, and certainly not in front of the board. His advice wasn't just an offer, it was a command. I looked back at him, taking in the weight of his words. The legal team had always been a distant entity in my career, something I rarely needed to engage with. But now, in that single moment, everything had changed. The shift in power, the new reality, it was no longer just about a job lost, it was about justice, about fighting for what was right. The advice wasn't just practical, it was a lifeline. It was a reminder that even when you feel small, even when the system feels rigged, you have rights. You have avenues. You can stand up, even when it feels like you're being cast aside. I felt the heat of something stir inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. I was angry, yes, but not just at the firing. I was angry at the injustice, at the audacity of it all. But I wasn't going to let that anger consume me. I wasn't going to lose myself in it. Instead, I took a deep breath and turned toward the door. This wasn't the end of my journey. It was a new beginning. And with every step I took, my resolve hardened. It wasn't just about walking out of that boardroom with my head high. It was about walking out with the knowledge that I had the power to make the next decision, to chart the course for what came next. The legal director's words, the unexpected support, gave me a new sense of purpose. I didn't need to fight in the boardroom anymore. I could fight for what I believed in, outside of it, and I would. As I stood there, with the weight of those words still heavy in the air, something unexpected stirred within me. It wasn't just the anger, or the sense of injustice, or the bitter taste of being dismissed in front of everyone. No, it was something deeper. I had always prided myself on my ability to maintain composure, to rise above the drama of office politics. But this moment, this public firing, it was different. There was no room for bitterness or resentment in the way I intended to walk out of that room. I had been in the corporate world long enough to know that when you're pushed to the brink, you can either crumble under the weight of it, or you can choose to rise. And I wasn't about to crumble. I had spent years building my career, navigating the highs and lows of office politics, steering my team through challenges, and creating results that were undeniable. Now, in this moment, I was faced with the hardest choice of all. How would I leave this chapter of my life behind? I closed the file slowly, deliberately, feeling the smooth edges of the paper slip through my fingers, each piece of work that represented a slice of my dedication to this company. It was surreal. Every document I held in my hands, every email, every report, they were no longer a part of my story. Not in this place, not with these people. The power had shifted. The finality of the moment was like a weight on my chest, but I couldn't let it break me. I didn't hesitate. I stood up, feeling my legs steady beneath me as I adjusted to the shock of the situation. I knew that every eye in that room was on me. I knew that they were waiting for some sort of dramatic outburst, some sign of weakness, some hint of defeat. But I wasn't going to give them that. This wasn't a defeat. It was a new beginning, whether they understood that or not. I turned, facing the room with the calmest expression I could muster, but inside, I felt a surge of strength. This was not a moment of humiliation. It was a moment of release. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to justify myself. The words came out before I could second-guess them. Thank you. The thank you wasn't for the firing. It wasn't for the pain or the cruelty or the way I had been unceremoniously discarded. No, it was for everything I had gained. It was for the opportunities I had been given, for the lessons I had learned, for the people I had worked with, the relationships that had shaped me, the growth that had occurred in the very crucible of challenges I had faced. It was a thank you for everything that had brought me here to this moment. It was a powerful choice. It was a statement of resilience. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or apologies. I wasn't going to grovel or make excuses. I wasn't going to lash out. I had no regrets about the work I had done, no guilt about the decisions I had made, no shame in how far I had come. And I knew in the depths of my soul that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need validation. I was already enough. As the words left my lips, I felt the room freeze. The murmurs that had begun when the CEO first made his announcement died down completely. The silence was deafening. For a moment, I could hear nothing but the rush of blood in my ears, the thud of my heartbeat, and the soft click of my heels as I turned toward the door. But I didn't leave immediately. I paused, holding the door handle in my hand, feeling the tension in the room pulling me back, compelling me to look one last time. There was something magnetic in that silence. Everyone was waiting for me to react, to break, to crumble. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. I had no intention of giving them any part of my dignity, my strength, or my resolve. That's when it happened. A voice broke through the stillness. It was the legal director, a man who rarely said anything in meetings, always preferring to remain in the background, offering quiet advice when needed, but never drawing attention to himself. Now, his voice rang out with an authority I hadn't expected. "Get a lawyer," he said, his voice low but unwavering. It felt like the room had collectively held its breath, and his words were the exhale that finally broke the tension. I turned back slowly, my hand still on the door handle, and saw him standing up from his seat, his face hard as stone. His eyes met mine with a directness I couldn't ignore. There was no hint of hesitation in his voice. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a call to action. The legal director wasn't speaking just for me. He was speaking for all of us. The unspoken message was clear. You don't just walk away from something like this. You stand up. You fight for what's right. The sense of solidarity in his words filled me with an unexpected sense of support. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that no matter how small we might feel in a moment of defeat, we always have the power to turn the tide. The legal battles were just beginning, and I had an ally in this fight. There was no longer any question in my mind about what to do next. I wasn't just walking out the door as a victim of corporate politics. I was walking out as someone who was ready to take control of their own narrative. I had a purpose now. I had a goal. The legal advice, coming from someone who understood the world of contracts and corporate law, was a lifeline. It was a shift in how I saw this moment. No longer was this just a firing. It was an opportunity to stand up for myself, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to ensure that this decision wasn't going to be the end of my story. As I pushed open the door, the silence of the room still pressing down on me, I felt something else building within me. It wasn't anger, nor fear, nor regret. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from knowing you are no longer at the mercy of others' decisions. That your worth isn't tied to someone else's judgment. That even in the face of an abrupt end, you can walk away with your head held high, knowing that the real fight is just beginning, and it's a fight you're ready for. I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, but I didn't feel the finality of it. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. The fire of determination burned inside me as I stepped out into the world, ready to face whatever came next. As I walked out of that boardroom, the weight of the moment began to settle. But it wasn't the heavy kind of weight that burdens you with doubt or regret. It was the kind that ignites a spark, a fire that starts slow but grows stronger with every step you take. The doors closed behind me, but in that brief, quiet moment, I realized something profound. The exit wasn't just a physical one. It was a mental and emotional shift. I had walked into that room expecting to leave broken, expecting to feel like a failure, expecting to let their judgment define me. But by standing tall, by choosing to close that chapter with grace and dignity, I had reclaimed my story. It wasn't about the job. It wasn't about the firing. It was about the power to define who I was, not through the eyes of others, but through my own. The next few days were a blur. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, friends, and even a few former rivals. But there was one message that stood out from the rest. It was from the legal director. He had followed through on his advice. We spoke at length about the next steps, and soon I found myself preparing for a legal battle that was more than just about the severance package. It was about the principles at stake. It was about standing up against something that wasn't right, even when the deck seemed stacked against you. The fight wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned whether I was making the right choice, whether the battle was worth it. But every time those doubts crept in, I remembered that silence in the boardroom, the legal director's unwavering words, and the quiet resolve I had felt when I left. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stand up, even when you're standing alone. In the end, the legal process led to a settlement that not only honored my time and efforts at the company, but also reinforced my belief in the importance of standing your ground. It wasn't just a financial victory, it was the personal victory of reclaiming my power, my voice, and my dignity. And as I moved on to new opportunities, I carried that lesson with me. The strength to walk away from what no longer serves you, the wisdom to know when to fight, and the grace to say thank you, even when life doesn't go according to plan. The path forward was mine to choose, and I was ready to walk it, not as someone who had been knocked down, but as someone who had learned how to rise again and again on their own terms.